This is Talking Foreign Policy, a critical perspective on Canada's role abroad, and I'm Yves Engler. On April 1st, Israel killed more than a dozen, including two top Iranian generals, when they blew up part of the Iranian diplomatic compound, embassy compound in Damascus. Dozens of countries have condemned Israel's violation of international law. The Canadian government has stayed silent, even though it emerged that Canada's embassy, which was right next to Iran's, was damaged, windows blown up, etc. And it looks like Israel is trying to instigate a full-scale war with Iran and possibly draw in the U.S. into a broader regional war. To discuss this, I have Dimitri Lascaris, who is a Canadian peace activist, a former contender for the leadership of the Green Party, and who just went on a 5-week tour of the Middle East. First of all, thanks a lot for coming on, Dimitri. And what do you make of Israel's recent attack in Syria against Iranian consular building?
Well, for purposes of international law and according to international custom, a diplomatic mission such as was partially destroyed in Damascus is territory of the country that occupies that mission. So Israel has effectively attacked, from an international legal perspective, the sovereign territory of Iran. I have no doubt that Israel's leaders understood what they were doing. Under Article 22 of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, and Israel is a founding party of that convention, the territory of the diplomatic missions are inviolable. That's the word that they use. There is no conceivable justification for what Israel did. The fact, even if it's true, that, and I believe this is the justification that Israel's government has offered, that there were Iranian military officials at the embassy at that moment who have been involved in providing arms to Hezbollah and other groups that are attacking Israel. That does not justify one iota what Israel did from a legal perspective. And in fact, if you apply that rationale to Israel's own diplomatic missions, pretty much every one of them would be fair game, because in all of them, we all have good reason to believe there are military personnel, there are intelligence officials, all of whom play some kind of a role directly or indirectly in Israel's genocidal and apartheid project. So if we take Israel's reasoning to its logical conclusion, pretty much every Israeli diplomatic mission in the world is fair game. Obviously, any person of conscience and any competent international lawyer would reject that reasoning.
And so how do you see this in the context of the broader geopolitical dynamics? And to me, the fact that the Canadian government stays quiet, even when Canadian embassy property was destroyed, I should say that the Canadian embassy has been closed in Damascus for a bit more than a decade, but it still is, the property of the Canadian government, and there's still apparently Canadian officials that have gone there over the years and stuff like that. That to me, this is part of the whole impunity that Israel is given to violate international law, and Israel looks like they're trying to escalate. And Iran has said they're going to react to this; they are going to respond. And then the Israelis have said, "Well, if you respond, we're going to bomb Iran." And then the Americans have jumped in and said, "We're supporting Israel." So, how do you see the sort of broader kind of geopolitical context of this?
I think the only rational inference that you can draw from Israel's conduct, not just in terms of this strike, but in the months leading up to this strike on the Iranian mission in Damascus, is that they are trying to provoke an attack from Iran or from other, groups that are alleged to be proxies of Iran, such as Hezbollah, that would provide the Biden administration and other Western governments with the justification which they would need in order to convince their constituents that the United States should become involved directly in a major war against Iran, which would have not only absolutely devastating impacts on the people of Israel, the people of West Asia generally, but would also have a devastating impact on the global economy, given its reliance upon fossil fuels from the region of West Asia. That's what's going on here. If you look back, to the beginning of, the genocide itself is in many ways a provocation, the genocide that's being perpetrated upon the Palestinian people. But ever since then, Israel has been stepping up its attacks. For example, in Lebanon, it started by attacking South Lebanon, expanded the attacks to the Bekaa, to areas that are reputed to be strongholds of Hezbollah. And then, just before I left Lebanon, they launched an attack on northern Lebanon, which is the part of the country that is furthest away from the Israeli border. So they are clearly acting in a way, and they must know this, that is designed to cause Hezbollah to intensify its attacks and launch attacks deeper into Israel. They must know this, and they must know that they put Iran now in a position where it has to respond militarily in some quite dramatic way, because if it doesn't, it's basically giving a green light to Israel to attack with total impunity Iranian targets, even when it amounts legally to attack on the sovereign territory of Iran. It is absolutely astonishing to me that our governments are continuing to allow Israel to conduct itself in this way. I never imagined, Yves, as critical as I was of Western government foreign policy, that their tolerance levels for this kind of depravity was this extensive. I never imagined they would let it go to this point. And at this stage, I don't see any indication that they've reached the limit of their tolerance. And this is extremely dangerous for us all.
Yeah, today on the front page of the Globe and Mail, they had a piece about Lebanon, about people in northern Israel, basically on the border with Lebanon, demanding a full-scale attack against Hezbollah, against Lebanon. And the framing is that there's 100,000 or so Israelis that have been displaced, and it's been 6 months of difficulty for these people displaced. And they frame the whole thing as we have to have this big war against Lebanon because that's what's going to bring peace down the road. And they ended off with this: wouldn't it be so great if we could travel all across the region? It was peace everywhere, but we can't. We aren't there yet. So to me, this Globe piece was very much setting the stage for increased Israeli violence in Lebanon. But already, as you've pointed out, and you know much better, there's a couple hundred Hezbollah fighters have been killed by Israel, including some commanders, many civilians within Lebanon. Can you tell us a little bit more about that what you saw on the ground? But also, you interviewed Hezbollah's international relations head. We should note that one of Canada's contributions in all this is that we list Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. So we don't list the Israeli military as a terrorist organization, but we list Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. So my understanding is there's been almost no Canadians or no Canadians ever interviewed this official. Can you tell us a little bit about their perspective and anything about sort of Canada's role in all this?
Well, let's note first of all that Israel has the option of evacuating its citizens from the northern border region to avoid the effects of combat. The people of Gaza don't have that option, and they're living in an area which is much more densely populated. Half the population is children, and the munitions which Israel has brought to bear in waging this war on the civilian population of Gaza are far more destructive and have done far more damage to date than the damage that has been caused by Hezbollah, even by Israel's own accounts of the damage. So it's a little bit, frankly, rich for the Israelis to be complaining about having to evacuate their citizens from northern Israel when they're depriving the Palestinians of that very same option as they pummel the enclave into submission. What I saw there and heard from people on the ground, and this has been confirmed by reports in the Western media, is that the number of civilians who have been killed on the Lebanese side is a multiple of the number of civilians killed on the Israeli side. The numbers that were being reported at that moment in late March when I interviewed Ahmad al-Massawi of the political wing of Hezbollah was about 8 Israeli civilians had been killed in attacks by Hezbollah, and over 50 Lebanese civilians had been killed in attacks by Israel's military. I went and personally inspected, sites that had been completely demolished in South Lebanon and in the Bekaa Valley by Israeli attacks. By all appearances to me, I could see absolutely no indication that these were sites that served any kind of a military purpose. They destroyed a small warehouse for food. They destroyed a commercial building. They destroyed another empty civilian building in a village near the north western border between the countries, where a young man who was in his little cafe tending to his business was killed by shards of glass and bled to death. His fiancée, who was upstairs at the time in the building, came down and found him dead on the floor of his own cafe. He was no militant. This is going on now all over Lebanon, effectively. And any attempt to characterize the attacks of Hezbollah as constituting terrorism while exempting Israel from that accusation, when it has killed so many more civilian and destroyed so much more civilian infrastructure, is the height of hypocrisy. And Canada is a full-blown participant in that hypocrisy. We've never heard any suggestion from any Canadian official that what Israel is doing meets the conventional definition of terrorism, when that's obviously the case. There is no more destructive terrorist actor in West Asia than the government of Israel, frankly. Mr. Ahmad al-Massawi, he's a former member of the Lebanese parliament. His brother was killed in 1988 in combat in South Lebanon against Israel's occupying forces. He told me, for what it's worth, people can judge for themselves. They can see the interview on my website, my YouTube channel, that it is prohibited by the leadership of Hezbollah to attack civilian targets. And he specifically pointed out what I just pointed out, which is that the civilian casualties on the Palestinian side and the Lebanese side vastly exceed the Israeli civilian casualties. I asked him, I thought this was the most sort of revealing exchange that I had with him. Did Hezbollah view the prospect of a single state in which the Jewish population of Israel and the Palestinian population of historic Palestine live side by side as equal citizens? Did they view that as a desirable and practicable outcome? And he was not. He did not hesitate in saying yes. And in fact, he spent some time talking about the respect that the Quran attaches to the religion of Judaism, and that in the opinion of the leadership of the organization, they have no qualms whatsoever with the Jewish people. Their problem is with the project of Zionism and the dispossession and displacement of the Palestinian people. And if they were able to deal with a Jewish Israeli population that was not driven by the Zionist project, they could coexist peacefully. He was very clear about that, and I found his answer to be, again, for what it's worth, quite sincere. So I think that, and the reason why I did this interview, Yves, I knew full well that there were going to be people in the West, particularly in the mainstream political and media discourse, who would take exception to anybody interviewing a Hezbollah official. I did this because I want, as I'm sure you do and many of the people who are listening to this conversation, to avoid a broader war. And we are not going to avoid a broader war if we do not engage in some level of civilized discourse with the people against whom we could find ourselves in a devastating war. We need to have these conversations. We need to try to listen to them and to understand whether they may have some legitimate grievances, whatever we may think of their methods. And if we don't do that, we're going to end up in a much worse place than we were after the criminal invasion of Iraq by the Bush administration. That's where this is heading.
Yeah, and one of the sort of fronts in what seems to be increasingly a broader regional war is the U.S. and U.K. have been bombing Yemen. My understanding that at least 150 strikes over the past 3 months or so. Some have said it's actually into the couple times that. The Houthis, or Ansar Allah, as they're, I think, prefer to be known, say that dozens, I think 30 some odd civilians have been killed in Yemen. And Canada's not part of the main bombing forces, but it is part of the operation. I think they're calling it Protective Guardian, and which the Houthis or Ansar Allah say that they are stopping Israeli ships and to put pressure on Israel to stop its horrors in Gaza. So Canada is contributing a little bit of military support and some diplomatic backing of the U.S. UK strikes. It's my understanding when you were in Israel, you went to the port in Eilat. And can you just tell us a little bit about what you saw there, and also, maybe sort of your perspective on that kind of broader question of what's going on with Yemen as well?
So Eilat is the only Red Sea port that Israel has. It's on a narrow sliver of coastline. On one side is the Jordanian port of Aqaba, and on the other side of this port is the Sinai Desert of Egypt. And it's not the most important port in Israel. Haifa is a substantially more important port, but it is quite important. And I did go down there strictly for the purpose of seeing what effects the attacks of Ansar Allah were having. And what I found was effectively a ghost port. I was there for 24 hours. I went to the offloading areas of the docks where commercial ships and tankers come in. I didn't see anybody working, no employees whatsoever at the docks. I had a clear view of the facilities. They were literally devoid of any kind of activity. There were no commercial cargo ships and no tankers in the territorial waters of Israel. And in fact, I didn't see any in that entire Bay Area, which also encompasses Jordanian and Egyptian territorial waters. There were simply none. That was on the first day that I arrived. The next day in the morning, I did see a cargo ship and a tanker, but one of them went to the port of Aqaba, and the other one seemed to be heading south through the Red Sea and didn't seem to be heading in the direction of the port of Eilat. Just before I arrived, the director of the port of Eilat announced that the port had seen an 85% reduction in maritime traffic. This was in December. Shortly after I departed, they announced that they were laying off 50% of the port workforce because of the complete absence of any business in the port. I also noticed when I was there, this is a significant tourist destination in Israel. There was almost no activity whatsoever in the tourist parts of Eilat. This is clearly having a very devastating impact economically. So Ansar Allah, what you may think again of it, is actually having an impact on the Israeli economy, its attacks. And they've been very clear, Yves, and I don't think there's any credible reason to doubt the truth of what they're saying. They will stop the attacks the moment that the genocide in Gaza is stopped. And rather than deal with this monstrosity that the world is witnessing in Gaza, and also to a lesser extent in the West Bank, the Americans and the British have decided to subject the people of Yemen to even more suffering, as if the genocidal behavior of the Saudi-led coalition over the past 8 years was not enough. And what I found most remarkable about all of this is that a few days ago, Biden's special envoy to Yemen, or for the whole crisis in the region of Yemen, admitted publicly that there's no military solution to what's happening in the Red Sea, and yet they continue to pummel Yemen. And there's no indication that they're going to stop. They've been having every week these gigantic protests in Sana'a. They post videos of them. They come out in numbers that you don't see in protests typically in the West, and they shout defiance at the West, and there's absolutely no indication. The attacks on military vessels of Western nations in the Red Sea continue. They continue to strike at some commercial vessels. There is no military solution to all of this, and the humane and rational thing to do is bring an end to the genocide in Gaza if you're really interested in restoring commercial traffic to the Red Sea.
While the Ansar Allah, they respond to genocide by trying to bring in some economic pressure. The Canadian government responds by speeding up arms permits for weapons companies selling to Israel. I think we'll leave it at that. Thanks a lot for coming on to talking Canadian foreign policy.
Thank you, Yves. Always a pleasure.